James Wan is back, baby. After a short stint off directing stuff like Aquaman and The Fast and the Furious 7, which don't get me wrong, Furious 7 was fine. I still haven't seen Aquaman yet. James Wan is back in the house of horror. He gave us one of my favorite horror movies of all time, The Conjuring. And holy shit, did he crush it. So without even feeling like it's an overstatement, I'm pretty sure James Wan is like the new godfather of horror for me. Every time I see his name attached to a horror movie going forward, I'm always going to be excited. And that happened with this one. I didn't even know *Malignant* was a movie that was happening, let alone coming out next month, being now, but I saw the trailer last month and it just said, from director James Wan, and I was just glued to the screen. The trailer didn't actually sell me on anything. It was okay. It was James Wan's name that totally piqued my interest. I gotta be honest, like going into this movie, I was nervous. Or not nervous, but like I didn't know where my expectations were. Normally, when I'm going into a movie, I can be like, okay, I don't expect much from this movie, and it's either going to meet that exact expectation, or it's going to exceed it, and then I'm gonna have a really good time. Or I go in with super high expectations, and more often than not, am completely let down. With this movie, I didn't really know how to feel going into it. I wanted it to be really good, obviously, but I was worried that maybe I had put James Wan up on a little bit of a pedestal. Nope, that is not the case at all. Although, for the first like 20 minutes of this movie, I did think, uh-oh, he's lost it, and now we've got cheesy horror. At the end of the day, someone somewhere could still say that *Malignant* is a cheesy horror movie, because most horror movies these days are. All right, really quick before we get into it, *Malignant* is the story about Madison, who is this young woman who is having her fair share of struggles in life and then ends up with the ability to see the murders of this serial killer monster thing that's running around the city. When she's having these visions, she can't do anything, she can't move, she just watches it happen, and of course that's taking a little bit of a toll on her mental health. Me saying that is probably misleading you in one way or the other. The biggest pull of this movie, outside of it being a new horror movie from James Wan, is that it's about the mystery of who this serial killer is and what he may or may not mean to Madison. And I really can't say anything else beyond that without giving stuff away. You are sitting there watching the movie and you're like trying to figure out what's going on. What is the connection? What is the twist going to be? What is the big reveal going to be? One knock I will give it is I think it did end up feeling a little predictable. And I say a little predictable because even once the reveal happens at the end of the movie, it was on the same, let's say, floor of what I had predicted, but it was at the opposite end of that prediction. That's the best way I can explain it, because it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was far better. And I just had a really good time watching it. Once I got over that first 15-20 minute hump and the movie really kicks off, it was non-stop. And that's something James Wan's really good at. I've always felt that he's had great pacing when it comes to his horror movies. Just look at stuff like The Conjuring, Dead Silence. Okay, well, maybe not as much Dead Silence, although I still think that was a pretty strong movie. And Saw. Those movies I thought were all paced incredibly well, and the same is true for *Malignant*. While I'm talking about those movies, I may as well say that *Malignant* felt like the amalgamation of all of those, let's say, greatest hits for James Wan. I definitely got feelings and tones in line with The Conjuring and Saw, and then it's also like he took a little bit of inspiration from Jeepers Creepers and sprinkled it on top. Like, this is a monster movie, kind of. It's a horror movie, kind of. It's an action movie, kind of, dare I say, but it's still got great levels of creepiness and absolute yuck to keep you entertained. I just need to say right now, I'm glad that there are twisted individuals in this world, like James Wan and the screenwriter, whose name I cannot remember right now. I'm really glad that they exist to come up with shit like this to entertain us. Like, yeah, at the end of the day, it's pretty morbid and grotesque, but that's what a horror movie is. And among the sea of horror sequels and remakes that we get, it is nice to get a movie like *Malignant* that is, on the face, a fairly original effort. Now, that being said, and I've said this before, there's nothing original anymore. Really, when you get down to it, there's not. Everything has, in one way or another, been done when it comes to the movies. So the best you can hope for is fresh, familiar, and that is what is happening with *Malignant*. But just take my word that while it's not an entirely new idea, the way that the filmmakers present it in this film was great. Like, you may not like horror movies, and if that's the case, you're probably not watching this review, but it was such a fun movie. Just watching it made me sit up in my seat and lean forward and say, well, what's going to happen next? How is this scene going to play out? And that's like almost the entire run of the movie, not just from the reveal onward to the end. And I need to stop focusing just on how great the reveal was, because the movie as a whole was immensely enjoyable. And it's very smart. Nothing's given to us that doesn't matter in the end, except for a few things that I may just have missed, but that's what will keep this movie from like absolute perfection for me, is that there's some conveniences that happen in the movie. And there's also I don't know if it's a trope or whatnot, but there's two detectives in the movie. Sure, okay, they are the detectives that are there for the first killing, and then conveniently they just happen to be the detectives that stumble upon the second murder. I'm sorry, I didn't realize Seattle, which is where the movie's set, was such a small town. I'm being sarcastic. I've been to Seattle. It's a large city, and there's probably more than just these two detectives. But that's the sort of stuff that you just kind of have to accept. It's movie stuff. And if you get hung up on that and knock a movie for stuff like that, you're not going to enjoy many movies these days. And James Wan continues to prove that he knows how to ratchet the tension incredibly well. There's a couple scenes in this movie where he just plays with the camera with certain angles, the way it either moves or pans across a room or zooms in on a character or even just remains stationary on one shot. Even knowing that nothing's probably going to come of it, it still sort of fills you with that sense of dread, and you kind of get that like, no. That is why horror movies are so much fun when they're done well. I was quite surprised with the level of like gory violence in this movie, because I always, when I talk about The Conjuring, which like I said is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, one of the things that I always mention when I'm telling somebody about that movie is that it was rated R because it was scary. There was no sex, there was no vulgarity, there was very little violence, let alone gore. I think there was a little bit of blood at the very end of that movie, but outside of that, it was fairly well reserved, but just terrifying. With *Malignant*, that's not the case. It's not like James Wan just retreaded The Conjuring, which is kind of what I thought going into this movie, and I'm not sure why. But no, there's a lot more in-your-face gore in this movie. So if you're a little squeamish, you might be put off by that. And the way he shoots some of the exterior scenes are just very interesting. And he's got this sense and style about it. It's just the cinematography is great. The very first shot of this movie, we're panning up this cliff to the asylum, right? This is how this movie opens, with this gorgeous, horrific looking asylum on the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean, and it just looks so cool. And that continues when we see exterior shots of Madison's house, whether it be nighttime or daytime. But it's really cool because at the nighttime, the way he films it with like fog moving and whatnot, the very first time you see the house, it gives you the sense of isolation. But then we see the house in the daytime, and no, there's neighbors there and there, and I thought that was really cool. Whether that was intended or not, very effective. Now, the performance from the lead in this movie I thought was pretty decent. She went above and beyond and gave a performance that was darn good for a horror movie. I'm not sure who she is. I feel like I've seen her in other things, but I'm going to have to look her up. I feel like I'm not that familiar with her. I feel like some people may say that this movie jumps the shark near the end, and they might be right, but when I really think about it, I'm like, no, this is a horror movie. It's not meant to be grounded in reality, even though most horror movies, that's where they start. By the end, whether you get supernatural elements or religious elements, or you just have regular old people being insane, whatever it might be, it fits into this movie. That's what makes the horror movie that you are currently watching so good, because it does go out of comfort zone, if the comfort zone is reality. At the end of the day, do you really want to be watching a horror movie that is 100% set in reality? I don't. And again, that just speaks to the creative angle that the director and the screenwriter went to with this story. And it's just, I don't know. I am so happy. I guess I was going in with lower expectations, concerned that James Wan wouldn't be able to do it again. And I don't know why I had those thoughts. It's not without its faults. And again, I can't really talk about one of my biggest questions that remain by the end of the movie without giving it away. Well, actually, no, because it's kind of, let me think. Now, this is a great time at the movies if you like horror movies. I feel like the level of cheese in it is low enough that it is totally worth going to see in the theater. So, for me, Malignant gets a very solid 9 out of 10, and I'm so happy that James Wan is back making horror movies again. I hope he gives us another one before he F's off back to the superhero genre. What about you guys? Have you seen Malignant yet? If you have, let me know what you thought about in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next one.